Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Should be a great late night conversation. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We are going to have yet another late night chat. Should be a lot of fun. So here we go.
I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Should be yet another great late night conversation. It is August 30th here. I'm in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. It is just after 10:30. It's 10:32. We're going to have yet another one of our late night conversations. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with the way we do things here on this channel, what happens is I give my opening remarks, which is what I'm doing now. I talk about what it is that's on my mind, what I want to talk about. And then from there, we do the roll call, where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. We find out who it is on the other side of the camera who is watching. And then from there, I answer your questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something that you think is important that you would like me to reflect on, if you have a comment to make or a question to ask or whatever it is, I implore you to send me a Rumble rant, a Rockfin tip, or a super chat on YouTube. Whichever platform. We're on 3 different platforms right now. We're on Rockfin, we're on Rumble, and we're on YouTube. So if you have something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, shoot me a super chat and I will put you on the list. I'll type it down and I'll put you on the list. And in the second half of our show, we will answer it. So we have just a few announcements before we get started here. I always want to start out with a couple announcements just since we're starting out, right? The night is young, so to speak. So before we roll into things tonight, first things first, I did want to let you know I just got my new copy of Marx for Sale, Commodifying Class Struggle by Peter Coffin. This is the book version of his recent film, which is very good. Marx for Sale is very, very good, critiquing the online social media content creator world that commodifies class struggle and turns Marxism into a commodified identity. I really enjoyed the film that Peter Coffin made, and I just got the book version of it. So I just wanted to make sure people were aware of that. We really love Peter Coffin and all that he does. Peter Coffin is a member of the Center for Political Innovation, and we're really happy to have him as a member. He makes great films, and he just made another great film, Marx for Sale. So shout out to Peter Coffin for his great work. And there you go. Wanted to get that out of the way. Another quick reminder for those of you who are watching, every single morning, you can watch on the YouTube channel of the Center for Political Innovation. You can watch the morning message that we put up every single morning. Every single morning, we put up a morning message from a different member of the CPI. I've done a number of them, but so has Briggy. Briggy's done a number of them. Sam Bismuth has done a number of them. Many of them have been made, right? Gabby has done them. Elizabeth Young, our president, has done them. Peter Coffin has done some. Noah has done some. Tyler has done some. We're always doing morning messages. Every single morning, we have a morning message from a different member of the CPI. And it's a really great thing that we've done. It's a way of holding our community together. It's a great way of starting your day. Start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism on the CPI YouTube channel. Morning message from the Center for Political Innovation. We are about to, tomorrow morning, it'll be the 46th message, I believe, right? We're at 45 already every day, and it's great. And if you are someone who likes what we do on these live streams, I encourage you to start your day out with our 5 or 6 minute morning message. Sometimes it's a little longer than that, sometimes shorter. We had one that was less than a minute. And in addition to that, if you really like what we do here and you want to take a whack at it yourself, you want to submit a morning message, you want to get your phone and record yourself walking down the street or sitting in your living room or whatever to help us out, that would be great as well. We would love to have you. We would love to have you take a whack at making a morning message. So if you want to submit one, we are taking submissions for morning messages. So I'll just link you the CPI YouTube channel right now, so you know where to go to watch the morning messages. I'll just link it here in the chat. CPI USA. That's the YouTube channel is at CPI USA, and this is where every single morning. Now, listen to what I said closely. Not every Monday, not every weekday. Every single morning we have a message. Every single morning. Difficult to do, but we've been doing it because our members are committed. Our members are committed to this. We have a morning message every single day. We have a morning message from a different CPI member. So go and subscribe. Wanted to let people know about that. Now, another announcement I did want to make, just while we're doing the morning announcements or the opening announcements thing, is my new book is available. Letter to Bob Avakian. This is my new book that I just published. And it's a CPI book, and I just published it, and it's causing a bit of a stir already on social media. People are saying, you can't be right about that. I said, well, you've never looked at my evidence to back up what I said. You've never looked at the evidence to back up what I have to say. But in the book, I praise heavily Bob Avakian for his great achievements and his leadership style. I critique his worldview, thinking that Russia and China are imperialist. And in the book, I also reveal 2 pretty big bombshells about who he's been working for. And we're going to get to those later in the opening remarks. We're going to talk about them. But if you want to order a copy of the book, you can order it here, right? You can order it here. And it's available now. I've got some interviews about the book lined up already. I've got, a couple interviews about the book lined up. So I'm looking forward to that. I'll be having an in-depth discussion about the book on Monday with the great Jeff Young. Jeff Young ran for Congress on a platform of abolishing the CIA, opposing the war in Ukraine. He's based in Kentucky. I'm going to be chatting with him about it. Peter Coffin and myself are going to have an upcoming chat about it. And there's a couple other potential conversations, interviews about this book that are in the works. So I'm excited about it. Basically, my hope is that everyone who looks into Bob Avakian's work will come across our message and our interpretation and our understanding of what he has to say. And that is our feeling, right? And so we would like to, hack the algorithm, get this everywhere that people are checking out Bob Avakian. They should check out our stuff as well, right? We should be a part of that conversation. That is the idea. So this book is now available. This is our contribution to the conversation. I'll be doing lots of interviews about it soon. Order your copy today. If you really like it and you want to make a review or you want to interview me about it for your YouTube channel or something like that, go ahead and do so. I am available. And we're just trying to get the word out there. So thank you for that, everybody. Those are my announcements. I just wanted to get out of the way. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. They are ridiculous. They're being absolutely ridiculous with the subscriptions. Views are way up. More people are watching these streams than ever before. But yet, for some reason, the subscription thing, they're messing with us. It's manufactured. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you hit the notifications bell. You may want to try to unsubscribe and then resubscribe just to make sure you're going to get the notifications. Make sure they don't unsubscribe you. Because they're really messing with us. Unbelievably, they're messing with us in the subscriptions. And that's why we're migrating to other platforms. We didn't put all our eggs in one basket. The YouTube thing is an issue, but we're going to keep going, right? I mean, that's not going to stop us. And we realize that at the end of the day, it's about building our group IRL in real life. That is what we are doing. We are building our organization IRL in real life, subverting the suppression of the algorithms. So, yeah, very good. Very, very good. Yeah. So if you have something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, send me a super chat or a Rumble rant or a Rockfin tip, whatever way you want to send us your question. So tonight, I just have a couple things I want to talk about in my opening remarks. First things first, yesterday, there was a dramatic conviction that happened in federal court in Washington, D.C. 5 anti-abortion activists were convicted of conspiracy to violate civil rights. They were convicted in federal court, and now they could be sentenced to up to 11 years in federal prison for blocking the doors during an anti-abortion protest. Now, I am pro-choice. And for a lot of my life, I've considered the anti-abortion protesters to be an obnoxious group of people, with their mutilated fetus placards and all of that. And, I even did clinic defense at one point when I was in the Workers' World Party in Detroit. We defended an abortion clinic from a right-wing protest against it. But regardless, I look at this ruling, and it is particularly outrageous. It's a very dangerous ruling. They're arguing that by blocking the doorway to this abortion clinic, they were conspiring. They weren't even convicted for blocking the doorway. They were convicted for planning to block the doorway, for conspiracy. Conspiracy laws in the United States are completely outrageous. Conspiring to block a doorway, and they're saying that's conspiracy to violate civil rights. They've been convicted. They're facing up to 11 years in prison. This is an absolutely outrageous ruling. I do have a video about it that I can show, because this is important. This is a very important case, and I will put like a news item about it, but it's a particularly outrageous case. And if I'm pro-choice, but I'm concerned about civil liberties, they're criminalizing protest, and I guess I'll tell you more after I put the video on. But this should concern you. You don't have to be, anyone, regardless of their political view, should be deeply concerned about this case. We put out a CPI statement on it because we are concerned about it. Because if you look at the details of this case, it's a big crackdown on the right to protest. So I'm going to put the video, the news report about it from local television. It's ridiculous how little coverage this has gotten in national media. I mean, this is a federal court trial. 5 people are charged with blocking a door, and they're going to get 11 years in prison potentially. They've been convicted of a very serious federal crime. Serious, conspiracy to obstruct civil rights because they blocked a doorway. That is something that we can't, as people that are concerned about the right to protest, we can't not take this seriously. And as much as, we have mixed feelings. Some of us in CPI are for abortion. Some of us are against it. I am of the opinion that abortion should remain legal. I don't think abortion is moral or ethical, but I do think it should remain legal. And I don't agree with them that abortion should be outlawed. But if you declare that blocking a doorway is a crime that should result in an 11-year prison sentence, this is outrageous, and it has huge implications. I'll talk about that after the video, but just take a look here.
11 years in prison.
Lauren Handy and 4 co-defendants were found guilty just 2 hours ago for conspiring to block access to the Washington Surgery Clinic in Northwest D.C. That is illegal under the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act.
Yeah, our Jordan Fisher was inside the court today for this verdict. He joins us live outside of there now with much more.
And I guess, Jordan, the first thing we maybe should start with is viewers may remember this lead defendant, Lauren Handy, as the woman who was reported having had fetal remains in her Capitol Hill apartment last year. Did any of that come into the trial?
That's right, Leslie. None of that got into trial, although her defense attorneys fought very hard to get it in. They argued that it spoke to her state of mind. They argued that it proved that she was there not to violate the FACE Act. That's the federal law that protects entrances to clinics, but rather because she believed.
Right. So the police raided her apartment. This woman is apparently a celebrity in the anti-abortion world. Lauren Handy is her name. And the police raided her apartment last year. And they apparently discovered 5 or 6 fetus remains in her apartment, which is weird as hell. I do not know what that is about. But they were not able to enter that as evidence in the case. So, you know, that is a weird detail. I have no idea what that means or what's going on there.
That there were children who were at risk and that she was going in to try to save their lives. That didn't get in. In fact, no evidence came in of any unlawful conduct on the part of the clinic or its operator. And that really hamstrung the defense a little bit and ultimately may have contributed to the guilty verdict we saw today.
I think in the end, this case is far from over. Ms. Handy is a person who has the courage of her convictions, willing to do time, obviously doesn't want to do time. And while she will fight on, we intend to fight on as well at the Thomas More Society.
Yeah, that was Handy's attorney, Steve Crampton, talking about the posture that they're in going forward and how they're looking at, already looking at appeals and looking at trying to get Handy and her co-defendants out of jail. They were actually stepped back today and taken out of the courtroom in handcuffs.
So with that said, how were prosecutors able to prove this case? How did they get these guilty convictions?
When you think about a conspiracy case, the prosecutors really had a lot to work with here. They had testimony from a co-conspirator who said that she participated in a meeting the night before and
a narc, right? So a testimony from a co-conspirator, that means a narc, basically, that there was an informant, somebody in the group who was sent in.
Which Lauren Handy discussed the plan and even discussed the statute, the FACE Act, that they might be violating. They had a surveillance video, they had body-worn camera video, they had video filmed by the defendants
Keep in mind, they're not actually convicted for blocking the doors. Blocking the door to any building, and especially a healthcare facility, is a crime. And there's no question that that's a crime. And they knew that they were committing a crime when they did that. But that's not what they were convicted for, right? They were convicted for conspiracy, which in and of itself means you're being charged with thinking, basically. You're being charged with thinking. You and a couple other people talked about doing something. They weren't convicted for the actual crime. And they said it was a conspiracy to violate civil rights by blocking the door to this abortion clinic. And based on that, they are now facing 11 years in prison. This is absolutely outrageous, regardless of how you feel about abortion.
Compellingly, they had testimony from 2 patients who told the jury that they were physically obstructed from entering the clinic for their appointments that day.
All right, so we've heard that the court...
Yeah, that's the crime. Two people had an appointment at the abortion clinic and were physically obstructed from entering. And that is the crime for which they could receive 11 years in prison.
The room was packed for this whole trial. I guess we're wondering, what was the reaction when that verdict was read?
I think it was stunned silence at first. I'm not sure any of the supporters expected a guilty verdict across the board. But as the defendants, who, as I said, were stepped back, were being led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, they began to yell out gestures of support. They called them heroes. They said, "I loved you." And they came out of court. Outside of court here today, they held a press conference. They vowed that their fight would go on as members of the anti-abortion movement. As far as her attorneys go, they're already looking towards appeal and, as I said, trying to get them back out of jail as they fight this conviction.
Yeah, we wondered what the verdict was going to be. We knew they weren't going to be in the court yesterday for certain reasons, and they were coming back today. And so to see this happen now, it is something interesting to watch for sure. All right, thank you.
So folks, you may not realize this, but blocking doorways is something that happens all the time. If you've ever been on a picket line with labor unions, one of the main things that labor unions will do on a strike is block the doorway, block scab labor from entering the workplace. That's what a picket line is. A picket line, the term picket, that actually comes from the U.S. Civil War. There was a general named Pickett, right? And they had Pickett's charge at the Battle of Gettysburg. He was a Confederate general who was known to have lines that you couldn't cross. And so as the labor movement got stronger, they had picket lines to block scabs, temporary replacement workers, from entering the plant. Well, this ruling says that if you block a doorway, this is violating someone's civil rights under federal law, and you could go to prison for 11 years for blocking a doorway. That's outrageous, right? Well, I mean, imagine that there's a protest happening at a military recruiting station, right? We're having an anti-war rally outside of a federal courthouse or outside of a military recruiting station, and someone stands in front of the door. Well, you blocked the door, you stood in front of the door, 10 years in prison, 11 years in prison. That's outrageous. That's outrageous. This basically outlaws civil disobedience, right? It makes it a crime to engage in civil disobedience. Like, I mean, people blocking doorways, blocking entrances is one of the main ways people engage in civil disobedience. You know, during Dr. Martin Luther King and his civil rights demonstrations, one of the things they did is they went to lunch counters that refused to seat black people or refused to serve black people, and they would all go sit in at the lunch counter. They would sit at the lunch counter and refuse to get up. So now I guess that would be violating the right of people in the restaurant to eat, and they would throw them in jail for 10 years for violating civil rights. You know, this is a really, really dangerous, it's a really, really dangerous law that basically makes having a sit-in, a federal crime that you can go to jail for 11 years. This is very dangerous. Now, I don't agree with these protesters. I think abortion should remain legal. That's not the issue here. The issue is here that they engaged in an act of civil disobedience, and instead of getting standard punishment for blocking a doorway, they got convicted of a very, very, very serious crime. And we need to oppose this. We put a statement on the CPI website already about this. And I must say, when Donald Trump was president, there was all this talk of Donald Trump being a fascist, right? And many things Donald Trump said were racist, anti-immigrant. Donald Trump said violent things, like he wanted to deport Ilhan Omar, send her back. He said he wanted to lock up Hillary Clinton. But what are the facts? As president, how many Joe Biden supporters did Donald Trump imprison? 0. As president, how many Hillary Clinton supporters did Donald Trump imprison? 0. But yet, Biden's not even finished with his 4-year term yet. And already, hundreds of Donald Trump supporters have been thrown in jail as a result of the January 6th protests. The Uhuru movement, a black revolutionary activist group, have been charged with being Russian agents, and they're facing 10 years in prison for daring to organize protests and daring to participate in local elections. And now we have Donald Trump, the major political opponent of Joe Biden. He's been charged in New York State. He's been charged in Georgia, and he's been charged in federal court in Washington, D.C., or in Miami. I mean, Donald Trump. So ask yourself, who is engaging in political repression here? Could you imagine the outrage if Donald Trump had tried to jail Joe Biden to prevent him from running against him in 2020? Can you imagine the outrage if Donald Trump started jailing all the Antifa protesters or jailing, Black Lives Matter activists? But no, we have a situation here where the Biden administration is blatantly using the U.S. Department of Justice to target various people, not all of whom are conservatives. These anti-abortion protesters, they are conservatives. However, it's important to note the Uhuru movement are not conservatives. They are black nationalists. They are revolutionaries and black nationalists, and they are facing a decade in prison for supposedly being Russian agents, for conspiracy as a Russian agent or whatever. The January 6th protesters, those folks are conservatives. We got, there's one side in American politics that is actively trying to imprison the other side. And now we know that the FBI rigged the elections for Donald Trump, right? The FBI, the main policing agency in the United States, the folks who did COINTELPRO, J. Edgar Hoover's agency, they found a story in the media that would have made Joe Biden look bad, and they went to Facebook and they went to Twitter and they made sure that they didn't air it. So we have a situation where the FBI blatantly meddled in the elections by suppressing a story about Hunter Biden's laptop that we now know was true the entire time. It was a true story. In order to make sure that Joe Biden won the election, they suppressed a story And they made Facebook and they made Twitter suppress a story that was actually true and called it Russian propaganda. So at this point, we have the FBI rigging the elections for Joe Biden. We have the Department of Justice imprisoning Donald Trump supporters, imprisoning black revolutionaries who run against the Democrats in local elections, imprisoning anti-abortion activists. This is a situation where there's definitely a whiff of fascism in this country. No doubt about it. There is absolutely a whiff of fascism in this country, but it's not coming from conservatives. The conservatives are on the defensive. The conservatives, they're mildly opposing the wars, calling for economic deregulation. The fascism is coming from Joe Biden, and it is coming from the woke wing of the ruling class that is committed to degrowth economics, driving down the population. No wonder they want to defend those abortion clinics, right? They want to make sure people are having those abortions because we can't have more people, especially not more low-income people, not more black and brown folks. I mean, it's unbelievable what they're saying. They're determined to drive down the population. They're determined to drive down living standards. They're determined to censor the internet and determine what news people are allowed to consume, what people are allowed to be told and believe. They're determined to outlaw protests now. They want to outlaw the Uhuru movement and their protests opposing U.S. foreign policy. They want to outlaw these anti-abortion protesters. They want to outlaw protest against them. They're giving ridiculously long prison sentences to these January 6th protesters. People that walked into the Capitol. The door was open. They walked in. Boom, 15, 20 years in prison. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous what they're doing. Was it criminal trespassing to go inside of the U.S. Capitol building during a rowdy protest? Sure. But do they deserve 15, 20 years in prison? Absolutely not. And these anti-abortion protesters, is it a crime to engage in civil disobedience, to block the doors of an abortion clinic? Yes. Should they be penalized for it? Yes. And that was their whole point. It was a civil disobedience. But should they face 11 years in prison? Is this a felonious conspiracy to violate civil rights because two people had trouble getting to their abortion clinic appointments? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. This is very, very, very dangerous. When you have the FBI blatantly meddling in elections, where is the fascism coming from? Where is the fascism coming from? I'm telling you, if you understand the economics of fascism, if you understand what fascism actually is, it is coming from the woke Democrats. And they are the ones sending more and more money to the fascist Nazi fighting force in Kiev, the fascist junta that runs Kiev. Zelensky is just a puppet. To the people that are tearing down World War II memorials. And they're the ones that are sending the Department of Justice after Chinese Americans, labeling Chinese Americans as spies, whipping up anti-Asian racism against the Asian American community. Fascism is coming from the so-called left at this point, right? The degrowth woke left that wants to destroy Russia, that wants to destroy China. They are the force that is pushing the fascism. And this is yet another example of this being the case. And I have to highlight it. We put out a statement as the CPI, just like we support the Uhuru movement, despite the fact that we don't necessarily agree with them and their perspective on black nationalism and the white working class, etc. We absolutely cannot, stand by and let them be labeled Russian agents and sent to prison for 10 years. Well, we just released a statement as CPI, talking about this case that's happening in Washington, D.C. and how they're criminalizing anti-abortion protests. It must be opposed. It must be opposed, right? Even though we don't agree, not necessarily. There's a wide variety of views. Some people in CPI are very opposed to abortion. Others are not, right? I think it should be legal. I do believe that women should be allowed to engage in abortion. I don't think criminalizing abortion is something that should happen. That is my personal view. Now, there are other people in the group who think it should be illegal. There's other people in the group who think it should be completely allowed and welcomed and don't even have a moral issue with it. We are not focused on that issue. We're focused on opposing the low-wage police state, opposing the march toward World War III, opposing degrowth, and opposing the driving down of our living standards. We're a pro-working class, pro-international solidarity, anti-imperialist organization. And so, I think that this needs to be said. So you can check out the statement that we put together John McCarthy wrote it. Thank you, John McCarthy, for writing this great statement that we just put up on our website. We've got to oppose this attack on civil liberties. It is very, very dangerous. And I want to thank the web team for getting it up there. And we're going to start having more regular statements and articles. We just added a films section to our website. And we're marching ahead because this is very, very important. This is very, very, very important. We should not be tolerating a situation where this can be allowed to go on. This is very, very dangerous. It's very dangerous indeed to see this happen. Very dangerous, very, very dangerous. And if we get into the mindset, right? If we get into the mindset, and I'll get to that. Very good. You're on the list. If we get into the mindset that if somebody's right wing, it's okay for the government to jail them. If somebody's right wing, it's okay for social media to ban them and suppress them. We're giving the power to our class enemy, right? Our job is not to protect the liberal order from conservatives. Our job is to fight for socialism. And conservatives at this point are less in favor of warmongering and less in favor of suppressing civil liberties than the so-called liberals are. So that needs to be kept in mind. I just wanted to start out my stream tonight by talking about that. Now, the other issue I wanted to talk about is that, during the Obama administration, Barack Obama, he established diplomatic relations with Cuba, which was a great thing, right? Cuba has wanted to have the sanctions on it lifted, has wanted the USA to recognize their government for a long time. Obama lifted some of the sanctions on Cuba, not all of them, but he lifted some of them. And then Donald Trump reimposed sanctions on Cuba when he took office. And one of the sanctions that Donald Trump reimposed on Cuba was their designation as a state sponsor of terrorism, which is an outrageous designation. Cuba is not a state sponsor of terrorism. It's a special designation that some countries get, where they're designated as a state sponsor of terror. It's absolutely outrageous. Cuba is not funding terrorism around the world. Cuba sends more medical aid around the world than any other country in the world. Cuba sends literacy volunteers and doctors all over the world, not AK-47s, not drones and tanks and weapons. Cuba is largely an exporter of humanitarian aid. And they're, at one point, yes, in the 1960s and 70s, even up into the 80s, they were backing various armed struggles throughout South and Central America. And that was the correct thing to do because these countries were having brutal military dictatorships imposed on them by the United States. And the people had to take up arms. They had no choice. But since the 1990s and the so-called opening up of various countries, Cuba has instead backed the support for a peaceful road to socialism. And in fact, so much so they stopped aiding the FARC in Colombia. When the FARC in Colombia, the armed rebel group, refused to advocate a peaceful transition and refused to sign a peace agreement and join the government, at that point, Cuba cut off its aid to them. So Cuba is not a state sponsor of terrorism in any way. But yet Biden has not lifted the state sponsor of terrorism designation that Trump reimposed on Cuba. So Code Pink has got a petition that they have put urging the Biden administration to lift the state sponsor of terrorism designation that has been imposed on Cuba reimposed by the Trump administration that Biden is maintaining and keeping intact. And I think that's a great petition, and I intend to sign it. And I see Jamie Turner is asking my opinion on rap music. So there we go. And you're on the list, Jamie, and thank you for the Rumble rant. I think that designation as a state sponsor of terrorism that's been imposed on Cuba should be lifted. Cuba is a victim, as Abel Malcolm says. Cuba is a victim of state-sponsored terrorism. It's not a sponsor of terrorism itself. So I think this is a very good petition. And I wrote a whole essay for Mint Press about how Cuba's foreign policy hasn't changed. The world has changed. And now that a peaceful road to socialism has opened up in Latin America, they don't have to engage in supporting armed struggle. But that communists have always advocated a peaceful transition to socialism. They always have. So there we go. There we go. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about, and this is related to my new book that just came out, right? Today I tweeted out, Bob Avakian is an asset of French intelligence. And I believe that that is true. Now, I don't believe he's a spy. He's not engaging in espionage. He's not breaking into government buildings and revealing things. Nothing like that. Nothing like that. Bob Avakian is not engaging in any criminal activities. However, the French imperialists, I believe, have established covert control over his organization. And in my book, I make a very strong case for that because of the fact that it is very apparent that, all right, so I guess I'll just start from the beginning. 1982, Bob Avakian fled the United States for France, and he moved to France in 1982, and he applied for political exile status as a political exile. France at that point had a policy of allowing political exiles to move into the country. Bob was denied political exile status. The French government did not grant him political exile status, yet he remained in France until 2003. Until 2003, he stayed in the country. Now, if he was in the country already, and if he applied for and was denied political exile status, he must have been granted some right to stay in the country. He must have made some arrangement in order to remain in the country. If you enter a country and then you make a big point of applying for one visa and it's denied, they know you're there and they'll get rid of you. But he was allowed to remain in the country. What's also interesting to note is that at this time, France and the United States were at odds with each other in many different parts of the world, and that Bob Avakian is not the only American radical to have fled the United States for France. Eldridge Cleaver, who is Bob Avakian's close friend, lived in France until 1975. And he raised a family in Paris. He ultimately returned to the United States in 1975. But for 2 or 3 years, Eldridge Cleaver was in France as a political exile. In addition to that, around the same time, 1981, Ira Einhorn fled to France. Ira Einhorn was the leader of the environmental movement in Philadelphia. He he bragged about being the guy who invented Earth Day. I don't know if people ever heard of Ira Einhorn, also known as the Unicorn Killer. But here, I'll pull up a picture. Ira Einhorn, a very strange case. Ira Einhorn. So Ira Einhorn, this hippie guy, I'll put a picture of him up here, the guy who presided over the Earth Day celebrations in Philadelphia in 1970, and he was just this well-known hippie environmental activist. His girlfriend disappeared, and the police got a warrant and they searched his apartment and they found his girlfriend. They found Ira Einhorn, also known as Unicorn, which was his hippie name, Unicorn. They found his girlfriend mummified in his closet. So Ira Einhorn, that guy, he was charged with murdering his girlfriend. Well, he was on trial and he was facing a trial for murder, and then he disappeared. And his bail was paid for by a very, very wealthy family in Canada, the Brofman family. They paid his bail. Members of the Philadelphia City Council testified and urged that he be granted bail. And right before his trial was supposed to start, Ira Einhorn disappeared. That was in 1981. Where did Ira Einhorn turn up? France. And he was living in France. And he was discovered in 1997 living in France under a false name. And he was living there as Eugene Milan. He had a Swedish wife, and he was living as a writer, living in France. France apparently took in Ira Einhorn. And when the U.S. government tried to extradite Ira Einhorn from France, the French government went to great lengths to prevent them from doing so. They forced the state of Pennsylvania to pass a special law in order to make sure that there was no way he could be charged and face the death penalty. So the French state legislature passed a special law saying that Ira Einhorn would not face the death penalty and could not face the death penalty. And so finally, in 2002, he was extradited back to the United States. The French government, went and bent over backwards to protect Ira Einhorn, the guy who mummified his girlfriend. It gets even weirder. At Ira Einhorn's trial, Ira Einhorn testified that he didn't kill his girlfriend and that he had information about CIA mind control programs. And he read into the record of the court all kinds of information about CIA mind control programs. He said that the CIA actually killed his girlfriend and that he had information about it. That's pretty weird, but that's not all, right? You have to understand that France and the United States have been at odds with each other quite a bit, and that one of the main disagreements between France and the United States has been the issue of nuclear power, right? American and British imperialism, their focus, one of their main ways of making money is through the oil markets. France is a big advocate of nuclear energy, so much so that France actually sent nuclear scientists to Iraq to help Iraq develop peaceful nuclear energy, and Israel bombed the Iraqi nuclear power facility and killed not only 10 Iraqis in 1981, but a French citizen. This is around the same time Bob defects to France, right? So there's a rivalry that, Israel and the United States team up basically to kill a French citizen and bomb a nuclear power facility in Iraq. Bob flees to France. Now, what then happens? Mumia Abu-Jamal becomes a major case in the United States. That's one of the main cases that Bob Avakian's people organize. Bob is directing his political group from France, from exile, and they start organizing in support of Mumia Abu-Jamal. Mumia Abu-Jamal is a former Black Panther who's been charged with killing a police officer, was sentenced to death. And the Revolutionary Communist Party devotes all of its energy and all of its time to trying to free Mumia Abu-Jamal. Well, the French government also supports Mumia Abu-Jamal, and they don't just support him. Not only does the French government announce that they support Mumia Abu-Jamal, the French government names a street in Paris after Mumia Abu-Jamal. In addition to that, 25 different cities in France have granted citizenship to Mumia Abu-Jamal. In 2003, Paris named Mumia Abu-Jamal as a citizen of Paris, and they had an elaborate ceremony at the city hall in Paris where the mayor of Paris started pumping his fist and chanting, "Mumia is now a Parisian, Mumia is now a Parisian," and Angela Davis flew in and accepted the certificate of citizenship on behalf of Mumia Abu-Jamal. The French government very clearly was one of the main backers of the effort to free Mumia Abu-Jamal. A number of people from France flew into the United States to support freeing Mumia Abu-Jamal. Catholic nuns and priests from Germany and France flew in. The Pope supported Mumia Abu-Jamal. And the Revolutionary Communist Party, C. Clark Kissinger, who's one of their main organizers, an old SDS activist, he was one of the main organizers of the Free Mumia Abu-Jamal coalition. And isn't it interesting that the French government is going all in for Mumia Abu-Jamal at the same time that Bob Avakian is in France directing the group? But it gets better. It gets better, right? I know for a fact, as someone who was part of the International Action Center, that most of the fundraising that the International Action Center did to support Mumia Abu-Jamal came from France as well. Larry Holmes toured France. He went up and down France raising money for Mumia Abu-Jamal, going to meetings of the French Communist Party. The French Communist Party is not a regular communist party. And I gotcha. You're on the list. The French Communist Party is part of the French government. The French Communist Party supported bombing Libya and murdering Gaddafi. The French Communist Party supported bombing Mali and the French occupation of Mali. The French Communist Party supports sending weapons to Ukraine and has voted for war credits. They're critical, though, right? They're critical of NATO and they're critical of it, but they still blame Russia for the war. They have a daily newspaper in France called L'Humanité, and the French Communist Party has a number of seats in the French parliament, right? They have a number of seats. They are not a small, irrelevant organization, but they basically have denounced Marxism-Leninism. They're a Euro-communist organization. They're a wing of the French government. They support French imperialism. They supported the bombing of Libya. They support sending weapons to Ukraine. They supported the occupation of Mali to fight terrorism. They're an entire wing of the French government. And they openly supported Mumia Abu-Jamal as well. And imposing the death penalty, not just in France, but around the world, is one of the main projects that the French Communist Party has devoted itself to. And the French Communist Party is very heavily infiltrated and involved in French intelligence activities. So if you see this situation where Bob Avakian is directing his group from Paris, and the French government is throwing all of its money and resources and sending people to the United States to free Mumia Abu-Jamal, and it just so happens that Bob Avakian's political sect are devoting all of their time to trying to free Mumia Abu-Jamal, I think we can tell what's going on, but it gets better. It gets better. It gets so much better than this. When does Bob Avakian return to the United States? When does he leave France? When does he leave Paris and come back to America? 2003. And what was going on in 2003? That's the year the United States invaded Iraq. That's the year the USA invaded Iraq. And did France support the USA invading Iraq? No. Jacques Chirac denounced it, and France got a lot of oil. They imported a lot of oil from Iraq because they didn't want to do business with American and British oil companies. France had a much closer and friendlier relationship with Saddam Hussein than the Americans and the British did. And France was denouncing the United States invading Iraq up and down, backwards and forwards. And that is when Bob Avakian comes back to the United States. And at that time, you'll remember, in the United States, there was a hysterical campaign against France in the United States. They had freedom fries instead of French fries. So at the time when the division between French imperialism and American and British imperialism is at its height, that is when Bob Avakian comes back to the United States of America. And what does Bob Avakian do when he comes back to the United States of America? He immediately directs the Revolutionary Communist Party to start focusing on a campaign to impeach George W. Bush, drive out the Bush regime. Isn't that interesting that at the moment, after he's been directing his political group from Paris for years, and his group has been focusing on supporting explicitly and almost exclusively a cause that the French government also supports and French intelligence is also supporting, that then as the division intensifies, 2003, Bob finally makes his triumphant return to the United States. And when he gets to the United States, he orders his group to go all in to drive out the Bush regime. But it gets better. What also happened? The next year, 2004, what happened? Right? 2004, every year in France, they have a film festival, right? It's called the Cannes Film Festival. And the top award at the Cannes Film Festival is the Palme d'Or, the Golden Palm, right? And what movie won the Golden Palm at the Cannes Film Festival in 2004? None other than Fahrenheit 9/11 by Michael Moore. The French government and the French establishment basically decided they wanted to get rid of Bush because Bush was not respecting Europe. Bush had invaded Iraq. So they gave the Palme d'Or to Michael Moore that very year. And Michael Moore pledged that he was going to drive out the Bush regime, right? So at the very time that the French government is going all in for Michael Moore, and I mean, the more you look at this, the more you realize that Bob Avakian's organization is very much an asset of French intelligence, right? That the French imperialists, in their divisions with the American imperialists, they didn't support the invasion of Iraq. They didn't want, and they successfully helped to stop the execution of Mumia Abu-Jamal. And so because of that, it's very clear that Bob Avakian's organization received most likely some covert support and was in cooperation with French intelligence. Now, that's not necessarily bad, right? Because freeing Mumia Abu-Jamal and preventing his execution was a good thing. I think Mumia Abu-Jamal is innocent. And the war in Iraq was wrong, absolutely. But you'll notice that now that French imperialism and American imperialism are in alliance against Russia, the Revolutionary Communist Party is also denouncing Russia, right? They are also echoing the same kind of allegations that you'll find in L'Humanité, the daily newspaper of the French Communist Party, you'll find coming from the Revolutionary Communist Party. They are critical of NATO, but at the end of the day, Russia's still the bad guy. That's exactly what Bob Avakian is saying. That's exactly what the Revolutionary Communist Party is saying. They are echoing the same line, right? And when it came to Libya, Mali, so many places, now that French imperialism is no longer at odds with American imperialism, suddenly, when it came to Libya, they supported the revolution in Libya against Gaddafi. Now, they opposed the bombing, but they supported the revolution, and they promoted the revolution in Libya, right? And the more you look at it, the more it becomes very clear that Bob Avakian, his organization, he fled to Paris, and in his autobiography, and this is very interesting, and I quote his own words. In his autobiography, he describes how he lived in Paris from 1982 to 2003. And while he was living there, he joined a network. This is fascinating. He describes joining a network of other refugees from around the world, other communists who have fled to Paris from around the world. People from Chile who fled to Paris, people from all over the world, communists from around the world fled to Paris. There was a whole exile community in Paris of communists from different parts of the world who had fled to Paris. Now, if you put that in the context of the French Communist Party having denounced the Soviet Union in 1978 and becoming Euro-communists, if you put that in the context of the French government being big supporters of Mumia Abu-Jamal and being big opponents of the war in Iraq, and you put that in the context of a number of different communist radicals from America, such as Ira Einhorn, the unicorn killer, such as Eldridge Cleaver, the Black Panther, going to France, you can see that there is a wing of the French state. There is a wing of the French imperialist state that was using the Revolutionary Communist Party and continues to use them as assets. They claim to be neutral, right? Their position is neither Washington or Moscow, neither Beijing nor Moscow. They're neutral, but they're not. They are representing the French imperialist line, which is not as hard against Russia as the United States, not as hard against China as the United States, but still partisan to the United States, against Russia and China. Right? And if you look at the Revolutionary Communist Party and their analysis of affairs, where they call Russia imperialist and blame them for the war in Ukraine, where they call China imperialist and blame them for the situation on Taiwan, it becomes very, very apparent that they are echoing the foreign policy of the French imperialist ruling class, and that they take instructions from the very same people that the French Communist Party takes instructions from. Now, the Bob Avakian people, they call themselves Maoists, and the French Communist Party, they're the old Communist Party. So you would think that they would be politically not aligned with each other. But their views line up and their activities line up. The French government, the French state, the French Communist Party were supporting Mumia. The Revolutionary Communist Party was supporting Mumia. The French government, the French Communist Party was opposed to the war in Iraq. The Revolutionary Communist Party opposes the war in Iraq. The French government blames Russia for the war in Ukraine. Bob Avakian blames Russia for the war in Ukraine. The French government calls China imperialist. Bob Avakian blames China for the situation on Taiwan, accuses China of being imperialist. Their views perfectly line up. And in the book, I go on to show that Bob Avakian's views have deteriorated from Maoist communism to Jacobinism. That what he believes, his idea of communism, is really in line with liberté, égalité, fraternité. He's trying to fulfill bourgeois democratic ideals. He says that China and the Soviet Union, Cuba, these countries aren't socialist because the broad masses of people are not involved in the decision-making. His definition of socialism is a fulfillment of bourgeois democratic ideals. And the more you look at it, his vision of a society with permanent revolution, continuous revolution, he glorifies the Cultural Revolution in China. This is the vision of Robespierre. This is the vision of Danton. This is the vision of Jean-Paul Marat. And that his communism doesn't discuss economics. There is no talk of economics. He never talks about the problem of overproduction. He never talks about the tendency of the falling rate of profit. He never critiques capitalism for making poverty amid plenty. The problem with capitalism is that it creates an oppressive state. It creates racism, sexism, and anti-LGBT oppression. And so we need to take control of the government and from above foment a vigorous, vibrant society with lots of upheaval in order to make sure that no oppression can ever happen again. This is the ideals of Jacobinism and the French Revolution. This is not the ideals of Marxism. Marxism seeks for the banks and the factories and the centers of economic power to be organized to serve public good and not the profits of a wealthy few. And Bob Avakian has traded Marxism and the economics of Marxism, the understanding of imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, and capitalism in its decay and the problem of overproduction and the holding back of human growth. He has traded that in for a Jacobinist French ideal of achieving the bourgeois revolution, of a pure democracy. That is what Bob Avakian strives to create. He strives to create a pure democracy, a pure democracy. And furthermore, his writing, even though he is a radical atheist, which also fits the tradition of the French Revolution, during the French Revolution, they converted the churches to being temples of reason. They were radical atheists during this time, during the time of the French Revolution. Not only is Bob Avakian a radical atheist, but while calling himself a radical atheist, there is a spiritual critique all through his writing. All through his writing, you find claims that a country isn't socialist because I wouldn't have wanted to live there. A country isn't socialist because of how it makes him feel, right? So much of his writing is idealist in its nature. He has rejected any Marxist understanding. And this is one of the biggest points in my book. And I expose that he is basically an agent, an asset of French intelligence, and that his political line does not reflect the views of a Marxist who is standing with the third world against the imperialists, but rather the views of someone who is trying to carry out the bourgeois democratic ideals of one particular wing of the French state, most likely the wing of the French state that is under the influence of the French Communist Party, the wing of the French state that aligned with Mumia Abu-Jamal, the wing of the French state that granted and protected and hid Ira Einhorn, the unicorn killer, the wing of the French state that tried to block Ira Einhorn, the unicorn killer's extradition to the United States and did everything they could to prevent him from being extradited back to Pennsylvania. I am showing you that the wing of the French state that supported the bombing of Libya, the so-called revolution, because, Gaddafi didn't, that's not a society I would want to live in. That is who controls Bob Avakian. He is accountable to the radical wing of French imperialism. And that is why he is a partisan for Joe Biden against Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is anti-Europe. Donald Trump is anti-globalist. Donald Trump is anti-NATO. In fact, it's worth pointing out, John Bolton has declared that if Donald Trump were to be reelected, NATO would be disbanded. That is John Bolton's words. He says if Donald Trump ever becomes president again, NATO will be disbanded, which would mean that all the military support the United States gives to France would go away. All the military protection, all the soldiers, all the military support the U.S. government gives to France as part of the NATO coalition would go away. All the intelligence sharing, all of that would go away. Now, isn't it interesting that Bob Avakian, for his entire life, has advocated boycotting elections? His whole life, members of the Revolutionary Communist Party have been told they're not allowed to vote because if they vote, their name could get called to serve on a jury, and then they would in their jury questioning might have to answer questions about the Revolutionary Communist Party, and they boycott elections. They always boycotted elections. Their members never registered to vote until 2020. In 2020, Bob Avakian endorsed Joe Biden and called on his followers to endorse Joe Biden. Now, isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting that at a time the French state was in danger of losing its support from the United States as a member of NATO, at a moment that the French imperialists were in jeopardy of possibly losing all the benefits and protections the USA gives them as part of the NATO alliance, That is when Bob Avakian flipped his position and decided, yes, we have to vote for Joe Biden. He didn't just say vote, he said vote for a Democrat. That's when Bob Avakian flipped his position. He went from boycotting elections to suddenly now we have to vote, and he endorsed Joe Biden in 2020. You want to talk about shady, you want to talk about obvious who he's working for. I have shown this. There are so many different reasons that you can see very blatantly that Bob Avakian is an asset of French intelligence and works for French imperialism. Many different examples of this, but it's very, very blatant. And I talk about, dismantling NATO is something that we should be in favor of, because anything that breaks apart the unity among the imperialists, is a victory for the international working class. Trotsky, you'll remember, was going around before the Russian Revolution advocating the creation of a United States of Europe. He called for the creation of a United States of Europe. And Lenin said, no, we don't want the creation of a United States of Europe, because that would bond the imperialists together and strengthen their power. Trotsky was going around advocating for a European Union, and Lenin said, we don't want that. We don't want a European Union. We want the French imperialists and the British imperialists and the German imperialists to be divided from each other. As anti-imperialists, we do not want the unity of the imperialist states. That is the Marxist position. But now we know why Trotsky was advocating that position. Why was it that while Lenin was saying not to support the United States of Europe, Trotsky was saying it? Because Trotsky was being handled by Alexander Parvus. Google Alexander Parvus. Trotsky credits Alexander Parvus, who was a Russian-born but German Marxist, a member of the German parliament, who was a socialist, who was funding Leon Trotsky, who developed and invented his theory of permanent revolution, and was an intelligence officer for German intelligence. Alexander Parvus was handling Trotsky, and Trotsky advocated the creation of the United States of Europe because of the fact that a German intelligence officer was using him in the same way that French intelligence is using Bob Avakian. Alexander Parvus was an arms dealer who smuggled weapons to Turkey and was an arms dealer for the Ottoman Empire during World War I. He was a member of the German parliament, and he manipulated leftists and radicals to serve German imperialism. I'll get to that. And you're on the list, Lionel. And Alexander Parvus, it should be noted, is also responsible for enabling Lenin to return to Russia, because Lenin was anti-war. And so Alexander Parvus is a very important figure in the history of Marxism, not for his beliefs. He was just a reformist, pro-German imperialism social democrat. But he's important because he handled Leon Trotsky and was the puppeteer behind Leon Trotsky, working for German imperialism. And also because of the fact that Alexander Parvus was responsible for sending the Bolsheviks back to Russia during World War I. He went to Switzerland, he gave Lenin a lot of money, and he enabled Lenin to return to Russia on a sealed train. So, the role of these different intelligence agencies and the imperialist intelligence agencies and their manipulations and their maneuverings against each other is not something we should underestimate. And it seems that just as Trotsky was an asset of German intelligence in the lead up to World War I, Bob Avakian is an asset of French intelligence in 2023 and has been since the early 1980s. And that is what I maintain in my book. And if you look at everything I just talked about, Ira Einhorn, Mumia Abu-Jamal, and the support for him that was coming from the French government, if you look at the timing of his return to the United States and what the French government was doing then, if you look at their positions on foreign policy, you will see that Bob Avakian is not an anti-imperialist. He works for the French imperialists. That's the case. And that is one of the points that I make in my book. Now, I make a lot of other points too. And I show that prior to Bob Avakian going to France, I quote a very important academic work that was recently published that shows that the Revolutionary Communist Party was infiltrated in the United States by the John Birch Society and Western Goals, which was a right-wing organization that used them to carry out operations against China. I talk about that in the book as well. I talk about a lot of different things. This book surprises a lot of people. This book is not a hit piece. The two big bombshells about Bob Avakian being an asset of French intelligence and of Bob Avakian and how his organization was used to threaten and attack China during the late 1970s, and how right-wing American organizations that opposed diplomatic relations and opposed Jimmy Carter used the RCP to go after Jimmy Carter, to go after Deng Xiaoping. I talk about that. Those are the two big bombshell revelations. But overall, I critique Bob Avakian's political line. I show that it is Jacobinism, not Marxism. And I also point to the strength of his leadership style and why he has been so effective, why all the Maoist groups from the 1970s are gone except the RCP. The October League is gone. The Communist Workers' Party is gone. Almost all the new communist movement groups have dissolved, but the RCP is still there, and that is because Bob Avakian does have a certain charisma as a leader. He does have a very spiritual side to his leadership. He's able to, kind of whip his members up into a frenzy and build up for big events, and he should be admired for that. I spend the first 10, 20 pages of the book praising Bob Avakian for his strength as a political leader, talking about the great achievements. May Day 1980, his intervention in the Richmond oil strike of 1969. The RCP has some strength to it, and he has accomplished a lot over the years, and there's a lot we can learn from Bob Avakian. And that there's nothing inherently wrong with entering a strategic alliance, right? I mean, Lenin did take money from Parvus, and the Bolsheviks got funding from the German imperialists, right? It's not inherently wrong to work for the French imperialists, right? It's not inherently wrong to work for one imperialist power against another. There's nothing morally wrong about that. But right now, it is putting him on the wrong side of the fight between Russia and China and the Western imperialists, and it's distorting his position. And it has also led to his understanding of Marxism deteriorating into radical bourgeois democratic theory that rejects the economic struggle. And so that's a lot of what is in my book. And I hope that you will read it, and I hope you enjoy it. And I'm not telling you the half of it. There's way more than this in there, right? I have to document everything I say. Right now, I'm just sputtering off and telling it to you. But in the book, I document everything I say with quotations, with facts. Bob Avakian is an asset of French intelligence, and his neutral position on the Ukraine conflict, his support for Joe Biden, and his support for the Biden wing, the woke fascist wing of American imperialism, is done at the behest of French imperialism. And I am very confident of this, and you can learn all about it in my new book. So there you go, folks. Those are my opening remarks for tonight. So on that note, why don't we do the roll call? Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. You're all on the list. All the super chats are on the list. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. All right. We got Sue from Hollywood. Welcome, Sue. Glad to have you here. St. Louis, Timoshenko. Jenny Lynn from Cincinnati. What aboutism and why? Okay. John McCarthy from Chicago. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Lionel from Melbourne, Australia. Steve from Boston. Gonzalo from Argentina. Jamie in St. Paul. Valin in Seneca, South Carolina. David, St. David's in Bermuda. Greece, Panos. Keith Preston from Richmond, Virginia. Very, very good. Alex from Brazil. Colin in Greensboro. Molly McGuire from Orange County. Minden out of Midwest, Lumpia Logic. Shout out to you. Patrick in Maine. Briggy in Pennsylvania. High Level, Alberta, Canada. Welcome, High Level. Got to keep it at a high level here, right? Very, very good. All right. Patch in Arizona. Welcome, Patch. Good to have you. David Rennie in Ontario. Anthony in Detroit, Michigan. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to have you here. Mitchell Sparks in Pittsburgh. Hanson in Rumble. Very, very good. Mariah in North Carolina. I'm glad you enjoyed my opening remarks. Tatiana in Fort Worth. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome. Good to have you with us. Welcome. Cleveland Pirate Alex. Randall in Lexington, Kentucky. Welcome. Glad to have you with us. Anyone on the Rumble? We got Auckland, New Zealand. Kiwi Corner in Auckland, New Zealand. Anyone on the Rockfin? No one on the Rockfin. but there we go. Names and locations, names and locations. I'll keep calling you all out as I see you. Names and locations, names and locations. We got Bob Troy in New York. We got Micah in Las Vegas. We got Balthazar in Oakland. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We got Chris and his wife in wife April in Salt Lake City. Welcome, April. I hope you're enjoying the show. Hope you're enjoying the show. Welcome, 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 welcome. Dustin Schlesinger in Cleveland is with us. Welcome, Dustin Schlesinger. Glad to have you with us. Glad to have you with us. All righty. Wesley, the People's Republic of Manchester. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, folks. Now, I have made it kind of a tradition here that we play music. And I'm going to have to play some other music later just because of a question that I was asked. But I have made it a tradition on these streams that before I start answering questions, I do play music. So I thought that I would play the United Front song, which is a communist song from the 1930s about the class struggle, about fighting for jobs. It's by Bertolt Brecht. He wrote the lyrics to this, very famous playwright. He wrote Three Penny Opera and Mother Courage and Her Children. And so there you go. There you go. There you go. I think I'm going to put that on. So there you go. There you go. All right. We're going to listen to a couple versions of the United Front song, a class struggle song of the communists during the 1930s.
To eat. He wants no bull and a lot of talk that gives no bread and meat.
So left 2, 3, so left 2, 3 to the work that we must do. March on in the Workers' United Front, for you are a worker too. And just because he's human, he doesn't like a pistol to his head. He wants no servant under him and no boss overhead. So left 2, 3, so left 2, 3 to the work that we must do. March on in the Workers' United Front, for you are a worker too. And just because he's a worker, his job is all his own. The liberation of the working class is the job for the worker alone. So left 2, 3, so left 2, 3 to the work that we must do. March on in the Workers' United Front, for you are a worker too. For you are a worker too.
Yep, that's a classic Comintern, Communist International song from the third period when the Communist Party was, going to the masses, United Front from below. It's called the United Front song. And I'm going to play another version of it because it was originally in German. And there's different versions of it. Okay. Just trying to find the other versions of it that I have here. But there's different versions of that song, that have been, put together. I wanted to play different translations, You know, it kind of expresses, you know, their message, kind of go to the masses and organize. So here is a standard English version, and then I'll play you a more rare English version. So here we go.
And just because he's human, a man would like a little bite to eat. He won't get full on a lot of talk that would give him bread and meat. So left, 2, 3, so left, 2, 3, to the work that we must do. March on in the Workers' United Front, for you are a worker too. And just because he's human, he doesn't like a pistol to his head. He wants no servants under him and no boss overhead. So left, 2, 3, so left, 2, 3, to the work that we must do. March on in the Workers' United Front, for you are a worker too. And just because he's a worker, the job is all his own. The liberation of the working class is the work of the workers alone. So left, 2, 3, so left, 2, 3, to the work that we must do. March on in the Workers' United Front, for you are a worker too.
All right. So that's the standard English language version. This is a more rare version. I think this is a recording from like the Communist Party back in the 1930s. If I can guess. I mean, it's a rare version of it. And then after that, I'll start answering questions. So there we go.
As man is only human, he must eat before he can think. Fine words are only empty air and not his meat and drink. Then left, right, left, then left, right, left. There's a place, comrade, for you. March with us in the Workers' United Front, for you are a worker too. And man is only human, he'd rather not have boots in his face. He wants no slaves at his beck and call, nor life by a master's grace. Then left, right, left, then left, right, left. There's a place, comrade, for you. March with us in the Workers' United Front, for you are a worker too. But his own. The emancipation of the working class is the task of the workers alone. Then left, right, left, then left, right, left. There's a place, comrade, for you. March with us in the Workers' United Front, for you are a worker too. Then left, right, left, then left, right, left. There's a place, comrade, for you. March with us in the Workers' United Front, for you are a worker too.
All righty. So there you go. That's the United Front song, classic communist revolutionary song from the 1930s. So, all right. So now we have two Rumble rants that have come in. The first one is from Jamie Turner. And tell you what, I'll do that one second because I'm going to have to, I know exactly how I'm going to answer Jamie Turner's Rumble rant. So I'm going to do the first one. Was Charlie Chaplin a communist? Communist books and songs, there are a lot. What about movies? Okay, so Charlie Chaplin was considered a friend and fellow traveler of the Communist Party of the United States. He had fundraisers for William Z. Foster at his mansion in Hollywood. When William Z. Foster was running for president in 1928, he had a big event at Charlie Chaplin's mansion that was full of Hollywood celebrities to hear William Z. Foster's speeches. And Charlie Chaplin donated a lot of money to the Communist Party. And after World War II, when McCarthyism happened, he fled the country. I mean, they came for him and he was just like, I'm out of here because I've got a rap sheet as a communist that is 100 miles long. Because of that, he was out of there and he lived in Ireland for the rest of his life. He was mainly a comedian, and it's our comedy now is a lot more crass and a lot more gross, and we were a lot more quote unquote uptight as a society back then, I guess you could say, but we were much more refined. We were much more polite. And so what we thought was funny was a little more, restrained, right? Not as many dirty jokes, not as much loud mouthing. We were much more polite and refined. And so his humor doesn't exactly translate. But there are a couple of his movies that Charlie Chaplin made that have direct communist reference in them. One of them is a silent movie he made. It's a silent comedy sketch movie called Modern Times. And in Modern Times, I think I could probably show it on here because it's probably so old it's not copyrighted. I think I could probably show that Modern Times Red Flag sketch. Let me see if I can find this. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's a short little comedy sketch he did. That's clearly about communism. And it's kind of hilarious. So I'll put it on. It's from the movie Modern Times. It's not copyrighted. So it's an old enough movie. What year did the movie Modern Times come out? Right. It's an old silent movie that Charlie Chaplin did. And it's got this, it's a joke about communism. I mean, it's just a clever little joke about communism. That he did. It's a visual routine. It's physical comedy. Charlie Chaplin is one of the few Hollywood movie stars who successfully made the transition from stage to screen, right? Many of the screen actors, he made the transition from silent to talkies. Many of the screen actors didn't make the cut. They didn't have a good voice. They weren't used to talking on camera. And when Hollywood started having talkies, as they called it, many different Hollywood actors just couldn't make it. But Charlie Chaplin made it. He'd done these kind of silent comedy films for a while, and then he did audio. He did talkies, and he survived, and audiences still loved him. And Charlie Chaplin, he was one of the Hollywood greats, Hollywood classics. And he was a communist. He wasn't a Communist Party member, but he was so well connected to the Communist Party. And we'll get to that here in a minute. This is the sketch from Modern Times. yeah, the guy accidentally, he sees a red flag about to fall off a truck and it falls over. So he picks up the red flag, and then the revolution comes behind him and they think he's the leader of the communists. And that shows you that, like, at the time that movie came out, when did Modern Times come out, right? Modern Times. When did that movie come out? 1936. Okay. It's a part talkie film, right? It's not completely silent. Communism was so popular and so well known. There were so many communist protests and things going on in the United States that everyone got the joke, right? That he saw a red flag from a construction site, it fell down, he picked it up, and then the revolution happens behind him, right? You know, and so that's clearly, that's a very communist, and he shows the police brutalizing the protesters, right? Unfairly, and it's a clever sketch. Again, nowadays, you know, we you know, our comedy is all farting and shit and sex, and, you know, so that's not particularly funny. We're not like rolling on the floor laughing like, oh, he picked up the flag and now they think he's the leader of the protest. You know, we're not laughing about that anymore because our humor is much more crass these days. But back then, you know, that was funny. That was, you know, it was kind of an unfortunate circumstance. It's like slapstick humor. But you know, the movie The Great Dictator, when that movie came out, 1939, that movie came out. That was a really big deal. It was a really big deal because of the fact that, number one, it talked about how Jews were being mistreated in Nazi Germany, which was taboo in Hollywood. No one talked about that, number one. And number two, it ends, the very final scene is Charlie Chaplin making a communist speech about overproduction and, you know, how machinery is making us poorer and how that's leading toward fascism. And it's a speech that makes me cry every time. It's just, it's one of the most beautiful speeches. The actual movie, The Great Dictator, it's physical comedy, and he's just, I don't know, it's not the funniest thing I've ever seen. But that final scene in The Great Dictator is one of the most epic. He makes a full-on 5-minute communist speech, you know, against capitalism, against fascism. He never says the word communism, but I mean, it's beautiful. It's utterly beautiful. I don't know if I can get away with showing it on this stream or not. Is it going to flag me if I put it on here? Is it going to flag me? You know what? I'm going to put it on. I'm going to put on the Charlie Chaplin Great Dictator speech. And, you know, if it messes up my stream or whatever, I'll live. You know, so, all right, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to put it on because it needs to be seen. It's one of the greatest speeches, that has ever been given, you know, in a movie. And I see it on the internet, like 16 different places here on YouTube, which probably means that it's okay to show it. I'm not going to get my channel taken down. I'm not going to get a copyright strike for showing it. So let me cue it up. And since we're talking about Charlie Chaplin, since Jamie Turner asked about Charlie Chaplin being a communist, I would say yes, Charlie Chaplin may never have joined the party, but anyone who would make this speech in a major Hollywood movie and subject millions of Americans to hear this beautiful speech, which is about overproduction. It's about all the stuff I talk about to you guys every night that no one who calls themselves a communist in America talks about. Overproduction and technology making us poorer. It's about that. It's beautiful. It's everything I talk to you guys about night after night. He talks about in this speech. So I can't not show you this speech. I have to show you this speech from the end of The Great Dictator. You know, this is the beautiful speech that he ends the movie The Great Dictator with. And it could be a William Z. Foster speech. It could be an Earl Browder or a Gus Hall speech. You know, so I'm going to put it on. I have no choice. I must put it on. So here we go. Here we go.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another, Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men, cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world. Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
That's the move. That is, folks, you know, a lot of people hear that and they say, oh, what an inspiring speech. Isn't that nice? I am going to read to you. That is a communist speech, right there. I mean, let's just go over quickly what he said, right? Charlie Chaplin. I'm just going to pull up the text. Right? This speech is opposite of everything that is believed by the synthetic left. It is opposite of everything that's believed by the capitalists, right? Right. So first of all, he says, I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I would like to help everyone if possible, Jew, Gentile, black man, and white. And you have to remember, in the United States, they had Jim Crow segregation at the time. So to have that line in a movie was a really big deal in an American movie, right? That there were segregated movie theaters where that line was uttered from the movie screen, right? That's not a really big deal now, but back then that was a big deal, right? You know, we want to help each other, right? Right? We're not individualist. We're not greedy. You know, we're not just self-interested. We have a collective essence. We don't want to hate and despise one another. And here he's attacking overpopulation. He says, in this world, there is room for everyone. And the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we've lost the way. So right there, all the climate alarmists, all the Malthusians, all the degrowthers, he just told them to shove it. The good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. And the way of life can be free and beautiful. There is room for everyone. He's dismissing any notion of overpopulation, any notion of degrowth. He says, greed is poison man's soul. He says, what does he say? Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. That's the problem of overproduction, right? People are homeless because there are too many houses. People are hungry because there is too much food. Poverty amid plenty. Poverty created by abundance. The built-in problem of capitalism. Right? He goes on. And then he quotes the Bible. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke, it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man or a group of men, but all men. In you, the people. The people have the power to create machines. Now that's Engels, right? Man is the tool-making species, the only species that is capable of forcing the environment to serve him, right? You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure, meaning that with our ability to force the environment to serve us and to advance to a higher technological plane, we have the ability to march toward the ultimate goal of communism, right? Let us fight for a new world, a decent world that will give men a chance to work, eliminate unemployment. Unemployment was everywhere in the United States during those days, but what country didn't have any unemployment at that point? What country didn't have any unemployment? The Soviet Union. A decent world that will give men a chance to work and that will give youth a future and old age a security. They had just created Social Security. That was Roosevelt. Because there were so many communist protests that had gone on all over the country, Roosevelt in 1937 created unemployment insurance and created Social Security for older folks, right? Old age security. He's talking about Roosevelt. He's talking about how the Soviet Union had no unemployment, right? By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. Hitler had promised to create full employment in Nazi Germany, and he did it by putting half the country in military uniforms and the other half in prison camps, and that the fascists were also promising economic justice, but they were using degrowth methods and preaching racial hatred and bigotry in order to carry it out. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. But now let us fulfill that promise. Let's fight for a new world and do away with national barriers. Do away with greed, do away with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world where reason and science will lead to all men's progress. Right? Where reason and science will lead to all men's progress, to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite. And keep in mind, at this time, the Communist Party was defending democracy from fascism. And they had the Popular Front strategy of defending democracy and the American democratic ideals from fascism. That speech, that is a very communist speech. If there was ever a communist speech in a Hollywood movie, that was it. That was a communist speech. So, I would say Charlie Chaplin was a communist. All right. So the next Rumble Rant question is, what is your opinion surrounding rap music and the culture surrounding it? Well, look, I'll say two things. The first thing is that rap music, when it first started, was a lot more political. Public Enemy, groups like that were putting out a much more explicitly black nationalist, political, anti-establishment message. So that's the first thing, right? That's the first thing. Straight out of Compton, they show how the movie F the Police, how the song F the Police, the police in Detroit, shut down the concert as retaliation for the song, and the Public Enemy, and that there was originally more of a black nationalist and anti-government edge to rap. And a lot of the way rap music has become, it's a result of commercialization and an effort to depoliticize it. But I must say, even that, right? Even that, what do people complain about in rap music? They complain about the fact that the music is associated with criminality. They complain about the fact that the music refers to prostitutes, quote unquote, bitches and hoes, and it's misogynistic. And they refer to the fact that it involves cop killing and criminal activities and glorifying money. Well, I'm sorry, but working class music, okay, first of all, right, there is a very popular American song from the cowboy days, right? Buffalo gals, won't you come out tonight? Come out tonight. Come out tonight. Buffalo. Who do you think the Buffalo gals were? Do you think they were women that were just so overweight they looked like buffaloes? No, they were not. Those are ladies of the night. Those are prostitutes. Those are cowboys at the whorehouse, right? That's about prostitution. Buffalo gals, won't you come out tonight? And if you look at a lot of old American folk songs, a lot of old Western songs, they're about outlaws and criminals who shoot sheriffs and police officers. They're about people trying to make their fortune and make a lot of money. They're about, bitches and hoes and prostitutes and all of that, right? So the way rap gets singled out for that is really unfair. And now to make my point, I will put on a song, one of the most famous non-political Irish songs called Whiskey in the Jar. And I mean, if you can tell me that this song doesn't have all the themes that rap gets attacked for, if you can tell me, I remember listening to Whiskey in the Jar and listening to the lyrics, right? And this is not the Thin Lizzy version. This is the original Irish version of Whiskey in the Jar. This song is, we'll tell you what it's about, but listen to the lyrics. Listen to the lyrics here. I'm going to skip through the guy's introduction. The guy's a little weird with his introduction. Is a little weird, but here we go.
As I was going over the Fingalgary Mountain, I met with Captain Farrell and his money he was counting. I first produced my pistol and I then produced my rapier, saying, stand and deliver for Hannibal to save her. Must you ring them a do them a da? Whack for the daddy-o, whack for the daddy-o, there's whiskey in the jar. I counted out his money and it made a pretty penny, so I put it in me pocket and I took it home to Jenny. She sighed and she swore that she never would deceive me, but the devil take that woman, for she never treats me easy. Must you ring them a do them a da? Whack for the daddy-o, whack for the daddy-o, there's whiskey in the jar. I went into my chamber all for to take a slumber, taking Jenny with me, and for sure it was no wonder. But she threw me pistol charges and she filled them up with water, and then sent for Captain Farrell to be ready for the slaughter. Must you ring them a do them a da? Whack for the daddy-o, whack for the daddy-o, there's whiskey in the jar. 'Twas early in the morning as I rose up for travel. Up comes a band of footmen and likewise Captain Farrell. I first produced my pistol, for she'd stolen away my rapier, but I couldn't shoot the water, so a prisoner I was taken. Must you ring them a do them a da? Whack for the daddy-o, whack for the daddy-o, there's whiskey in the jar. They threw me in the jail without judge and without writing, for robbing Captain Farrell on the bold Gilgary Mountain. But they didn't take me fists, so I knocked the sentry down, and I bid a fond farewell to the jail in Sligo town. Must you ring them a do them a da? Whack for the daddy-o, whack for the daddy-o, there's whiskey in the jar. If anyone can aid me, it's me brother in the army. If I could find a station out in Cork or in Killarney, and if they'll come and find me, they'll go roving in Kilkenny, and I'm sure they'll treat me better than me own Miss Wharton Jenny. Must you ring them a do them a da? Whack for the daddy-o, whack for the daddy-o, there's whiskey in the jar. 'Twas early in the morning at the barracks of Killarney. Me brother took his leave, but he didn't tell the army. Our horses, they were speedy, there was nothing but the shouting, and now he makes our living on the bold Gilgary Mountain. Must you ring them a do them a da? Whack for the daddy-o, whack for the daddy-o, there's whiskey in the jar. Now some men takes delightin' in the drinking and the roving, and others take delightin' in the hurley and the bowling. But I takes delightin' in the juice of the barley, and courting pretty fair maids in the mountains of Killarney. Must you ring them a do them a da? Whack for the daddy-o, whack for the daddy-o, there's whiskey in the jar. Must you ring them a do them a da? Whack for the daddy-o, whack for the daddy-o. There's a whiskey in the jar.
Yeah, so in case you didn't realize, the lyrics to that song are basically there's this Irish guy, or I mean, he's in Ireland, right? Cork and Kerry Mountain or whatever. And he robs a cop at gunpoint, right? And takes all of his money, goes home, goes to sleep, right? His girlfriend then, calls the cops on him and fills his gun up with water so it won't go off. So when the cops come into his house, he pulls his guns out and tries to shoot them, and his gun won't go off. So they take him to jail, and he's in the jail, and he breaks himself out of the jail, and then he goes to a military base where his brother is in the army, and his brother goes AWOL and quits the army, and so they together become robbers living in the mountains and robbing people at gunpoint in order to survive. That is what the song is about. Now, there's other versions of the song, and one of the versions, right, that last verse, some take delight in the carriages a-rolling, some take delight in the hurling and the bowling, and that refers to like Celtic games, right? But I take delight in the juice of the barley, right? And that's whiskey in the jar. It's about getting drunk, right? And then many versions will say, and courting married women in the morning bright and early. So I mean, it is, you want to talk about sex, greed, bling bling, criminal culture. That is the most gangsta song I've ever heard, right? I mean, how does it get more gangsta than that, right? But it's Irish, so nobody cares. You know what I mean? Is there anyone who's like, oh my God, I don't, is there any like suburban white mother who they put on Whiskey in the Jar, the traditional Irish song, and she covers up, oh, little Johnny, I don't want him to hear that. Of course not. Right. So rap gets an unfair reputation. I will be absolutely honest about that. That working class music tends to be very crass. It tends to have violence in it. It tends to have criminality in it. And it tends to be very, it's about using drugs and getting drunk and getting women and living the good life. And, a lot of music. Peter Zotti says Thug Life. A lot of working class music romanticizes criminal activity and thug life, right? Is that right? Probably not. Is that, a good thing? Yes, I did say bling bling. Is that a good thing on the part of the artist? Probably not, but that is just the reality. If you go every culture in the world, working class folk songs often have crass meaning, crass content. Let me just put it that way. There's a lot of working class folk songs that have crass stuff in them. So I don't single out rap music for that, right? Even though I do admit that rap was originally much more political and much more involved in community issues and black nationalism, etc. Look, I'm not the person to talk to about this, but my good friend Doug Kim, who I look up to quite a bit, he has pointed out that it is trendy among woke progressives to deny that a lot of the hate crimes committed against Asian Americans are being done by African Americans because that's not politically expedient. And there are a number of Asian Americans who feel that is a weird thing that progressives have decided, that yes, a lot of the hate crimes being committed against Asian Americans in New York City and elsewhere are being done by African Americans, and that covering that up is part of the woke thing, and it doesn't make any sense, right? Obviously, most African Americans are not going around committing hate crimes against anybody. But because the narrative about racism is that racism is done by Trump supporters, it's done by white hillbillies, there has been this decision to not acknowledge that often in the hate crimes that have been committed in New York City against Asian Americans, which there have been a lot of, they tend to be done by African American folks. And that is not convenient to the woke narrative to point out. And I think Doug Kim has specifically called out Danny Haifong and other people around that narrative. That's not for me to say. And honestly, I know so little about the issue. I'm just telling you what I've heard. Okay. So I think I will put that. I won't say more about that, Alex, because I don't want to speak on it. I am not Asian American, and I have not researched the issue in depth, but it is a frustration that many of my Asian American friends have raised about the woke folks and how they don't seem to acknowledge for political reasons they are tampering with the reality of the hate crime situation. So there you go. Modern Maoists take their ideas from the Gang of Four. Can we separate classic Maoism from the Gang of Four? The Gang of Four very briefly held power in China. From about 1969 to 1976, when Mao died, the Gang of Four were in power. But Mao was leading China for a really long time. And, you know, the Cultural Revolution started with Lin Biao, the guy who assembled the Little Red Book, Lin Biao. And then it was finally after the fall of Lin Biao that the Gang of Four, Mao's wife and 3 other people, took over. And they were the ones that were arrested by Deng Xiaoping and charged with counter-revolutionary crimes for the Cultural Revolution. They were blamed for the excesses of the Cultural Revolution, and they were arrested. And that the ideology that most so-called Maoists believe in is more or less just the ideology of the Gang of Four period. The Soviet Union was social imperialist, etc. The 3 worlds theory and China's politics during those years got nuts. And if you don't believe me, right, this is an interview with William Hinton, right? William Hinton was an American communist. This is an interview he gave in 1976, and it's nuts. It's called China's Worldview, and I quote it, and the Gang of Four were nuts. Their worldview was bonkers, right? They said World War III was inevitable, and only 2/3 of humanity would die, right? And you read, that's what China was putting out, right? And you go read this interview for yourself. This was an American communist who was living in China. He gave an interview to The Guardian, which was the main Maoist communist newspaper in the United States. And he explained China's worldview. And China's worldview was that there was going to be World War III, and 2/3 of humanity would die, and then China would lead the world toward pure communism. That's nuts. That is a bonkers worldview. And that's what China was putting out. And based on that 3 worlds theory, that there was going to be a war between the USA and the Soviet Union, the 2 first world countries, and Europe would be destroyed in that war, the second world, and then China would lead the third world in building communism after the destruction of the rest of civilization by war. I mean, that's nuts, right? And that's what the Gang of Four were putting out. And they said that China could have full communism without raising the level of abundance. They said you could create pure communism by willing it, right? That they said that communism it was possible to achieve a higher stage in poverty. And that's what Deng Xiaoping made clear. The basis of communism, the higher stage of communism, is vast abundance. The breaking down of inequality requires the elimination of scarcity, right? And the Gang of Four got away from that. And they said that you could achieve full communism on the basis of having a correct political line. And they had this whole theory about how there was going to be a third world war between the USA and the Soviet Union, and China and the third world were just going to sit back and watch. And 2/3 of the human race would be killed, and then China would lead the world in building communism. That is a nutty worldview. It's a dangerous worldview, and it's an insane worldview, right? And if you read about what Jiang Qing, was advocating, you read about the glass snail incident, which was a horrendous incident where basically, a bunch of Chinese students who went and studied in America had the idea of making color televisions. And they came back to China and said, well, the USA won't export color televisions to the Eastern Bloc. So maybe we, as China, we could sell color televisions to the Eastern Bloc. We could get the plans and the designs, and we could set up factories, and we could sell color televisions to the Eastern Bloc. And Mao's wife got on television, held a press conference, and denounced these students for daring to ever suggest that. And said that color televisions were a decadent bourgeois invention. China would never want to have color televisions, right? That's nuts. That's absolutely nuts. Read about the infamous glass snail incident that happened in the final year of Mao's life. It was crazy, right? The Gang of Four, they were anti-growth. And, they were wreckers. The Gang of Four were professional wreckers, right? Mao built the Chinese Communist Party. He made a revolution. He took power. But the Gang of Four, all they ever did was persecute people. And so they had to keep, they rose up during the Cultural Revolution by persecuting people. And because they persecuted people, they had to keep the Cultural Revolution going, because if not, their ability to be in charge was dependent on persecuting people. And so the Cultural Revolution, every time the economy would start to move again, they would launch a campaign against somebody, right? Against something, whether it was Western music or makeup, or North Korea, or troop trains that were taking taking weapons to Venezuela, or I'm sorry, to Vietnam through China. They would block troop trains. It was nuts, right? The Cultural Revolution in China, it was nuts, right? It was a bad period, and China broke out of that. And China broke out of that, and that's a great thing. That China was able to overcome the Cultural Revolution. But the Cultural Revolution was anti-growth, and it was premised on the assumption that we can create pure communism in poverty. And it's a result of the fact that China was isolated. It was locked out of the global economy. It was barricaded. And so they said, well, okay, maybe we can't develop, but we can try to be the most egalitarian. Well, no, you can't. And that was a problem that plagued the entire communist world during the Third World. After World War II, the USA adopted the doctrine of containment, where it basically was trying to barricade and isolate all communist countries. And as a result of that, communist countries couldn't import the machine parts that they needed. They couldn't import the food and medicine that they needed. They were prevented from developing the way they wanted to. And they said, okay, what can we do? And it started with Stalin. Stalin, he started arguing that the USSR was entering the early stages of communism in the 1950s, and it was not. Right? In the final years of Stalin's life, the USSR was saying, oh, we're entering the early stages of communism. No, you aren't. No, you aren't. That's ridiculous. Right? Che Guevara, in the early years of Cuba, he tried to abolish material incentives in Cuba and try to say, well, you would have the new socialist man. People in Cuba would work hard for the good of the community. Well, it didn't work. It was a disaster, economically speaking. Che Guevara stepped down from leading the National Bank, and he went to the Congo and then to Bolivia to lead revolutions. Che Guevara was a great, brave revolutionary, anti-imperialist, but Che Guevara was not a good economist. And his economic theories, the theory of the new socialist man, was not good in Cuba. They had to move away from that. And the Cubans will tell you that Che Guevara's economic policies were not in line with socialism, right? And then the Cultural Revolution in China, Pol Pot in Cambodia, year zero, where they said that they could have full communism in Cambodia without industrializing even. Right, on the basis of an agrarian economy, right? Albania under Enver Hoxha, where they said in the 1980s that they were achieving full communism because they gave everyone free slices of bread or something. It was the communism. The basis of communism is vast material abundance. You cannot achieve communism, full communism, in poverty. Communism is the abolition of all social hierarchy, all class distinctions. Communism is a society where there's no coercion, where everyone can just do what they feel like doing and take what they need, from each according to his own ability to each according to his needs. And Karl Marx makes very clear in the Critique of the Goethe Program that in order to achieve the higher stage of communism, labor must become life's prime want and not a necessity, meaning there must not be any necessary labor. Technology must have increased to the point that nobody has to work. Right? And that people only work because they feel like it, right? The cooperative springs of wealth must flow abundantly. And only then can the narrow horizon of bourgeois right be crossed in its entirety. That is what communism is. And a lot of the various countries and a lot of the various communist groups during the Cold War forgot that and started thinking communism was when we make everyone equal. Right. And we can do that. The Progressive Labor Party, they say go directly to communism. That's their belief. We got to go directly to communism. We can't go directly to communism. Right. The Maoists, they all say that, the Cultural Revolution in China was the closest, the greatest advance, the closest thing to communism we've ever seen. No, it wasn't. Right. I mean, you cannot create communism with willpower. Communism requires changing material conditions. Karl Marx says right can never be higher than the conditions of society, And that's what you need to understand. And you cannot build an egalitarian society in poverty. The basis of eliminating social hierarchies is abundance. So there we go. All right. So that was my rant about the Cultural Revolution and about all of that. So now we'll get to the next question here, right? what's happening in Ukraine is similar to what happened to the Spanish Civil War. Ironically, since fascism in Spain is growing, Italy too. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of fascists from around the world and other people going to Ukraine because there's so much publicity about it. Afghanistan was similar in the 80s, right? When in Afghanistan, there were a lot of Muslims from around the world that went to Afghanistan. There were also a lot of Westerners who watched movies like The Living Daylights, and they went to go fight in Afghanistan, right? And when the imperialists foment a civil war, part of what they do is they foment a lot of propaganda around it. And so there you go. Do you think the RCP, your book, will elicit a response from the RCP? I hope so. I really doubt it. I really doubt it. The RCP is very paranoid. And I mean, for good reason. They've been subjected to a lot of persecution over the years. Bob has fled the country, and people are not fair to Bob. And I start out the book by saying he doesn't get the respect he deserves. That guy has been put through hell. He was unable to attend the funeral of both of his parents when they died because he feared political repression. His wife was sexually harassed. All kinds of very nasty personal things about him have been published. I didn't get into the details in the book because I don't want to repeat them, right? But when the split happened, right, when his organization divided, they recruited his psychologist, to their split. And that guy revealed all kinds of private information about Bob Avakian's mental health that shouldn't have ever been made public. And what was published in 1978 by the splitters from the RCP was horrendous. And I didn't publish it. I vaguely referenced it in the book because it's disgusting what they did. It's utterly disgusting what they did to Bob, right? The splitters in his organization revealed all kinds of mental health information about him that should never have been revealed. His wife, he talks about in his autobiography, how his wife was sexually harassed in really disgusting ways. They targeted his wife with sexual harassment, and he was ultimately forced to flee the country. The Secret Service launched an investigation because, he was misquoted in a newspaper as threatening the life of Jimmy Carter. And the Los Angeles Times misquoted him. And so the Secret Service launched an investigation, and they had a floor map of his house. And what Bob has been subjected to over the years is totally wrong, right? And he deserves more respect than he gets. People make fun of them, and all of that. No, Bob is a respectable person. He's given his life, and he's achieved a lot. Bob is one of the major reasons that Mumia Abu-Jamal is still alive. If it hadn't won for Bob, Mumia would probably be dead right now. He mobilized all of his group to do nothing but campaign for Mumia, and that was an admirable thing. And Bob held a communist organization together decade after decade after decade. The RCP is still here. October League, they're gone. The Communist Workers' Party is gone. The Democratic Workers' Party is gone. The May 19th Communist Organization is gone. All kinds of Maoist communist groups were formed during those years. They're all gone. Bob's group is still here. And that's because Bob has a level of charisma and a leadership quality that is very respectable. He knows how to get his members psyched up. He gets them almost into a mania. When he's building for a national day of action, they get into a mania as a group, and they don't sleep, and they go all in, and they build for their national days of action in utterly amazing ways. And he is very good at, whipping his members up into this go, go, go atmosphere where they are building a national day of action or a protest, and they go all into it. And it's very admirable. Bob has a certain spiritual quality of mobilizing people. Read about what he did on May Day 1980. May 1st, 1980, the Revolutionary Communist Party, a communist group, and this is 1980. This is the year Ronald Reagan got elected, right? The United States is not in a communist and leftist atmosphere. But that year, May 1st, 1980, the RCP organized pro-communist rallies with big pictures of Mao and red flags in almost every major city in the United States. Over 800 arrests happened. I mean, you read about what Bob did, there's a certain strength of character. And if we want to write that off and poo-poo that and go, Bob's wrong on a lot of things, but he's a very skilled organizer. He has a level of charisma and a passion that he is able to pass on to his membership. It's very effective. And I admire him for that. And I respect him for that. And he deserves respect for that kind of thing. He really, really does. You're on the list. He really, really does. And that it's not fair the way people just make fun of the RCP and dismiss them and the way they got canceled. The whole reason I decided to write this book was because they got canceled last summer. When the Supreme Court ruled on the abortion issue, right? The Supreme Court ruled on abortion and said that, overturned Roe v. Wade. Sunsara Taylor, a leader of the RCP, started organizing pro-abortion protests across America. And they canceled her. Vice, the Daily Beast, Yahoo News, The Intercept all ran hit pieces on the RCP. And it was outrageous, the things they were saying about the RCP. They said they were co-opting social movements. How are they co-opting? They've been protesting since before any of these woke kids were born. Bob Avakian organized, protests in support of the Richmond oil workers strike in 1969, right? Bob Avakian was marching with the Black Panthers in 1968. They've been organizing around police brutality year after year after year when nobody was. They've been going to court with police brutality victims, and they organized the October 22nd National Days of Protest against police brutality. The RCP, to say that they're co-opting social movements is one of the dumbest things anyone could say, right? They did social movements and social activism long before anybody else, long before it was trendy. And the way they were being canceled in the media and called it cults, it was utterly outrageous. And so I felt a need to defend them. And that's when I started thinking about writing this book. And one thing led to another. And so now I've written this book. And I hope that anyone who gets interested in Bob Avakian will come across it and they'll hear my side of the story, and maybe they'll agree with me and maybe they won't. But, Bob is a gateway drug for a lot of people. It's the most visible communist group in America. If you get interested in real life communist activism, they're one of the first groups you come across. So I want my side of the story to be there. I want when people research Bob that they come across my stuff. That's the idea. So that's why I wrote the book. I hope they respond to it. It would be in their interest to respond to it, but I don't think they will. All righty. All right. Is there an upside to imperialism? No, of course not. Right? No. I mean, imperialism is about holding back development. It's about impoverishing countries, etc. Now, sometimes it can be strategic. During World War II, we had to align with the British and the American imperialists against the fascists, against the German and Italian imperialists, right? So strategic alliances can sometimes be necessary, right? The Bolsheviks got financial support and money from the German imperialists in order to carry out the Russian Revolution. So sometimes, the divisions among the imperialists can be strategic for a revolution. There's nothing wrong with that. But imperialism itself as a system is holding back human development. It's capitalism in its monopoly stage, and it should be overthrown. There you go. That's all there is to that. All righty. So what is whataboutism, and why do they say it's a bad thing? I don't get it. Well, whataboutism is the tu quoque fallacy. No, you are, right? That's whataboutism. So the idea is that, if I'm arrested, and taken to court and charged with stealing, it is not a defense of me in court to say, well, what about the other guy? He stole something, right? It's a logical fallacy, right? It's a logical fallacy where, so you're accused, right? You're accused of something, right? And you say, yeah, but what about this other person? And it's not an argument. It's a logical fallacy. That's what whataboutism is. It's a slimy liberal thing that if you ever criticize Joe Biden, they say that's whataboutism. It's a lot of people don't even know what it is, right? It's like any of these things, right? It's like when I was debating Vaush, right? And he said that all tankies are Nazis. So I started listing off famous tankies, Albert Einstein, Langston Hughes. I said, you're calling Albert Einstein a Nazi. You're calling Langston Hughes a Nazi. You're calling Nelson Mandela a Nazi. And he says, that's just an appeal to authority. That's not an appeal to authority. An appeal to authority is if I say something's true on the basis that someone important, like the president or a famous person, said it. That's not what I was saying. He was literally saying that tankies are Nazis. And so I was listing off people that, according to him, must be Nazis. That's not an appeal to authority. And people do this all the time. It's a debate bro technique. Is you hear what the other person is saying and you make it into a logical fallacy when it ain't. Right? And that's, yeah. Whataboutism is used in debate bro culture now. You say anything. They say, oh, that's whataboutism. Whataboutism, it refers to the tu quoque fallacy. It's, if I'm charged with stealing, I can't get it up in front of the judge and say, what about the other guy who stole something? That's not an argument. It doesn't in any way acquit me of stealing, right? It's, that it's not a defense in court to go, no, you are. No, you are. Right? It's not a defense in court. That's what whataboutism really means. But, debate bro idiots turn it into all kinds of stupid shit. So there you go. I've never watched Beavis and Butthead. I've never watched it. I can't comment on it. Right. I mean, it's one of those cartoons that's not for kids. Right. There's like King of the Hill and The Simpsons and Family Guy. Right. I have watched King of the Hill. I have watched The Simpsons. I have watched Family Guy. I've never watched Beavis and Butthead. So I cannot give you an analysis of Beavis and Butthead. I will say that the rise of those shows, as much as I've enjoyed Family Guy, they make me laugh sometimes. I've enjoyed The Simpsons over the years. They have some pretty funny stuff. I will say that the rise of those shows is probably not a good sign for our culture. I'll just be honest. Those shows are very sarcastic. They're very cynical. And they are like cartoons for children, except they're for adults. So even though those shows can sometimes make good points and be redeeming, I would say that the rise of those shows in the 90s is really when those shows started to blossom, was not a good sign for American culture. It was part of our cultural cynicism setting in. Let me put it that way. That's really all I'll say. And those shows have different flavors. The Simpsons has been on television forever, and it's changed in so many different ways. Originally, Bart Simpson was the main character. Now, obviously, since then, Homer became the main character. King of the Hill can be a little bit preachy. And it's kind of a liberal show, but it's about a conservative Texas family, and it can be a little weird sometimes. Oh, South Park, right? Who can forget South Park? And South Park, over the years, it's zigged and zagged, but when it started, it was very much kind of a frat boy conservative show. Maybe a little bit libertarian. So I don't know. I overwhelmingly, even though I find some of those shows to sometimes be entertaining, I would argue, if you're asking me for a Marxist analysis, in my humble opinion, I would say the rise of adult cartoon programs, that are, comedy cartoons aimed at adults is probably not a good sign. The general atmosphere on those shows is not healthy and conducive for society. Like Molly McGuire, Jackass isn't the height of American culture. Exactly. You got it, Molly. You got it. You put it better than anybody. Those shows, not a really good thing for our society that they're out there. It doesn't say that we're getting smarter. It doesn't say that we're getting more serious. The rise of those kind of shows, not so good. Not so good. Doesn't say good things about American society. That's all I'll say about that. But I guess that's where we'll end. I'll probably do one last stream to close out the month of August tomorrow. I'll probably do it earlier tomorrow night. And then, just to let everybody know, our next patrons only stream is going to be on Friday, which is the 1st of September. The 1st of September, the first day of September, I always do the patrons only streams on the 1st of the month. So if you want to be included, sign up for the Patreon. I'm trying to rebuild my Patreon, and we need more support on the Patreon. And if you sign up on the Patreon, you do get my books sent to you for free. So, if you want, you can, if you sign up and become a paying member of the Patreon, if you sign up, I can send you a free copy of my new book. As Patreon supporters, they just, whenever I publish a book, they get one sent to them as a benefit. So if you can sign up on my Patreon, you can help me out that way. I will give you access to patrons only streams. I'll also give you access to my books when they come out. So consider signing up on my Patreon. And on that note, I am going to put on the closing music. I'll be back tomorrow night. So there we go. In the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. All righty.